We're alive. I need to get back to where I'm sitting. So Marika, thank you very much for agreeing to this chat. I'd like to just start by asking you a few things briefly about your past, because a very interesting experience that started off looking at forensics and then has moved on to looking at law. But just before we bring things right up to date, could you tell me just briefly a little bit about the experience you had when you were looking at forensic work?
Yeah, absolutely. I got introduced to what was called forensic archaeology when I was doing an undergraduate degree at the University of Southampton. And in particular, what I found interesting was how you could exhume mass graves and identify the people who were in these graves so that they could get a proper burial after having been identified. So this was actually something that I did research on, and then I worked in this field for a while. I did work in the former Yugoslavia, in Kosovo specifically, but I also did forensic archaeology and some search and recovery of deceased and buried people back in my home country, Sweden, for the National Criminal Police Department there.
And so it was through that you then became interested in international law and started doing further sort of academic courses and transitioned into a kind of new focus.
Having looked at things like war crimes alongside the forensic work that I was doing, because this was the forensic context that we were working in, it did come with all the crimes associated with it. So it came kind of naturally that I started looking at international law. So after I had come back from Kosovo, I was thinking to myself, I actually want to get a law degree. And I did a law degree with the Open University, and I really, really enjoyed it. So then I decided to do an LLM as well, a Master's in Law, and I did that in International Human Rights. So since then, for the past 10 or more years, the international aspect is something that has come with me, and I like doing international research or comparative research where you look at one country versus another country on a specific type of law or a specific way of how certain evidence, for example, is used in court.
And when did you join University of Portsmouth, and in what role?
Yeah, I came here in 2009, that's a long time ago now, and I originally started here as a senior lecturer in forensic studies, but quite early on I was geared more towards criminal justice, so my main role nowadays is more to do with criminal justice and international criminal justice. I also run the Criminal Justice Clinic, which is a clinic that's there to do research on criminal justice criminal justice issues home and abroad, but also we have a handful of clients who maintain that they are innocent, and we're helping them to reinvestigate their cases in the hope that we can help them do an application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is what's needed for them to get an appeal.
So one of the things that I think we were talking about earlier was misuse of evidence and wrongful convictions. So in your academic work, what sort of form does that work take?
Most of my research for academic purposes and what I publish on has to do with use and abuse of science in court. So I like to look at particulars in law, for example, when claims are being made that certain evidence proves something, but when you start to look at the so-called science that has been used, it's not really scientific. So we can talk about junk science is a common term that's used. When things are being exaggerated in court, where things are being used in the wrong way, or where in the latest article that I had published with a co-author, we looked at where dogs who are trained to find accelerants, which is basically liquids or things used to start or make a fire quicker or bigger. So these dogs are trained on a range of substances to go there, they sniff, and then they indicate. alert the dog handler to something. So then this becomes evidence in court that the dog has indicated on something. But you don't really necessarily know what the dog has indicated on unless you take that piece of whatever it is and take it to the lab and actually analyze it. But so often in the cases that we looked at, the lab tests weren't done. So basically somebody went to prison for a very long time based on a dog sensor. That's extraordinary when you start looking at it from a scientific point of view. It shouldn't happen, but it does happen.
That's a very fascinating and slightly alarming.
Yeah, very alarming,
finding.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned that the comparative studies in some of your studies are comparing the UK and the US systems, and we're interested obviously in particular in global Africa in the African context. Just wondered if you've got any reflections. I know at this point you haven't been involved in projects specifically in Africa, but based upon the work that you have been doing, what sorts of things are coming up that would be hugely important agendas in whatever country we're talking about, and issues that Africa also should be thinking about?
Yeah. I like to look at the structures of the criminal justice system, and I know I originally came into this Global Africa through talks about Malawi in particular, and having looked at Malawi a little bit now for this particular project, it absolutely fascinates me, because all the structures that we take for granted in our own jurisdiction, they are not functioning. You have prisons that are severely overcrowded, you have a mix of inmates who are awaiting trial alongside those who have been convicted already. You have a lack of resources, you have a lack of lawyers. The system doesn't work. It seems like the system has pretty much collapsed under its own weight. So there is absolutely no justice in a system that doesn't work. And those kind of things, they do interest me quite a lot.
So it certainly sounds like there's a lot of things that come out of your experience that would be important agendas in the African context for both research and action. Though the resourcing of them, I guess, is a big challenge as well.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for what you shared. It's fascinating and worrying at the same time in terms of the things that you're getting from the research, but hugely important.
I seem to have that effect on people.
Yeah.
But it's things go wrong in our own jurisdiction, even though we have all the criminal justice structures in place. So if we look at a system that is working and these things still happen, what on earth is then happening in countries where the structures don't seem to work at all?
So there's a lot to be done.
There's
certainly.
definitely a lot to be done. Thank you.
Thank you.